Viltrox is absolutely on fire right now with the release of their Pro series of lenses, and a number of these are APS-C lenses with a maximum aperture of f1.2, which in many situations eliminates the need for APS-C shooters to upgrade to full frame. And these lenses give a very similar look and low light performance to an f1.8 full frame lens. This latest release, the 56mm f1.2 Pro, also appears to go directly after Sigma's market share with their 56mm f1.4. And at release, the retail price is the same as the Sigma, and the Viltrox has a number of advantages. Now, it's not a case of one size fits all, and the Sigma still has some advantages over the Viltrox. So in this video, I'm going to go through and try to identify which of these two lenses might be right for you. In full disclosure, this lens was sent out to me at no cost to myself. This is not a paid or sponsored video, and Viltrox had no say in the making of the video. I'll put some links in the description down below to the best pricing I could find on the lens. It is a new release lens, so it's currently only available at a couple of different places. I just want to quickly touch on the 56mm focal length and why I think it is a great focal length, particularly for new photographers. And I know a lot of people go out and they buy a camera and they think instantly the photos coming out of this new camera are going to look a lot better than what is on their phone, and then they find that isn't necessarily the case. What I find with the 56mm focal length, particularly a lens like this can go to f1.2, this is going to give you these deeply out of focus backgrounds and these blurry background portraits that a lot of amateur photographers are seeking. And just by putting one of these lenses on your camera, taking a nice photo with a deeply out of focus background is going to give you a somewhat professional looking photo. Now, these lenses are perfect for portrait photography, and that is pretty much a standard. The 56mm focal length on an APS-C sensor camera is similar to an 85mm focal length on a full frame camera, and that is a classic headshot and portrait shot lens, and this is going to give you a very, very similar look out of your APS-C sensor camera. The other thing 56mm is great for is detail shots. So if you want to get some food photography, or if you want product photography, or if you're out traveling around and you just want to capture those little details, this is a great focal length for that, which just makes it particularly good. The other thing that I like this focal length for, and something that it is not considered a traditional focal length for, but I'm seeing it more and more, is street photography. And one of the superpowers of this lens, particularly going to f1.2, is you can have a subject off in the distance, and even with a reasonable distance between you and the subject, 56mm and f1.2 is going to allow you to blur out that background and isolate the subject that you're trying to draw somebody's eye to. And if you're in a street photography scene, you haven't quite mastered the ability to compose wide angle street photography, this is an excellent starting point. It also allows you to be further away from your subject so you aren't right up in their face. So this is literally one of my favorite focal lengths for street photography, even though a lot of people will tell you it's not a traditional street photography lens, or that's not really street photography. Don't listen to that. If you're on the street taking photos and you're enjoying your street photography, then absolutely use a lens like this, and I do all the time. Just getting into how this lens compares to the Sigma, first thing you're going to notice is the Viltrox is a much larger lens. And when we get to the optical test, you're going to see this is going to provide a number of advantages, but when it comes to the size and carrying it around, I think we could clearly say that is a disadvantage. And the Sigma is going to be much smaller, lighter, and less conspicuous when you're out doing photography, but we're going to see this does affect the optical performance. The other thing that we're going to see is this is an f1.2 lens, which by default will need to be a little bit bigger, and the Sigma is an f1.4 lens. So that does make it easier for them to make a little bit smaller package. But when you actually look at the build and overall handling of both lenses, they are excellent. Looking at the Sigma first, it's made out of this special composite material that Sigma makes a lot of their lenses out of. It almost feels like a combination between metal and plastic. It has a polished metal lens mount, it has a weather sealing gasket, it has a really nice dampened focus ring, and it comes with a pinch on lens cap, and it comes with a nice deep lens hood. When we look at the Viltrox, the first thing that's going to jump out at you, and one of the major advantages, is it does have an aperture ring on the lens itself. Now, particularly with Fuji shooters, they love this, but even when I'm shooting with my Sony cameras, I do love to have this extra point of control right on the lens. It also does have a weather sealing gasket, and it has a USB-C port for updating the firmware. It also comes with a pinch-on lens cap, and it comes with this really deep lens hood, which can be excellent for reducing flare, particularly when you have significant bright points of light coming from the side. As we get into the optical performance, what you're going to see is there are some big differences between the two lenses, but there's also some situations where there's almost no difference or they're indistinguishable from each other. Now, to start with, looking at vignette, comparing the Viltrox shot at f1.2 to the Sigma shot at f1.4, we are going to get a little bit more vignette with the Viltrox, which makes sense because it's got a larger maximum aperture. But once you stop both of the lenses down to f2, the Viltrox has lower vignette. The Sigma has heavy vignette that doesn't go away, and that continues throughout the whole range, where the Viltrox cleans up by about f2.8, f4, and it has almost no vignette whatsoever. Now, this is going to be a completely personal preference thing. I will also note that the Sigma does have in-camera correction, so if you turn that on, that's automatically going to correct the vignette, and while it doesn't make it go away completely, it does improve it quite significantly. Looking at distortion, the Sigma has quite strong pin cushion distortion, which must be corrected either in camera or in Lightroom. It will be very noticeable if you get straight lines anywhere near the edge of frame. That's not unusual for this focal length on APS-C sensor cameras, but interestingly, the Viltrox has the slightest amount of pin cushion distortion, which I haven't corrected in any of the photos, and it really isn't noticeable. It is almost perfectly straight. So the Sigma has significant pin cushion distortion versus the Viltrox, which is very minor, straight out of camera, and really doesn't need any correction whatsoever. Looking at the chromatic aberration performance on the two lenses, in all the real world shooting I did not see any. And when it came to purple fringing or color fringing on in-focus high contrast areas, it was basically non-existent. So it's not something that I would worry about on either of them. Even shooting black and white test charts, I couldn't pick anything. It might be in highly backlit scenes like backlit foliage and trees, you might pick up a little, but for the most part, it's not something that I would worry about, and I would say they're pretty much identical to each other. Looking at longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is a change in color cast in the out of focus areas before and after the plane of focus, if you shoot them on an angle on a test chart, you can pick the most minor amount, but in any real world shooting, I think this is going to be absolutely irrelevant, barring some backlit out of focus areas or trees. But in all the real world shooting I did, I just couldn't pick any. Now, the flare performance, I found them to be very similar. The Sigma has always been near perfect and has excellent flare performance. It does have a beautiful little bit of blooming around the highlights when you shoot it wide open. The Viltrox performance was very similar, and what I did find is it had a little bit more blooming in those highlight areas. I thought they were both excellent, but if I was going to say which one had a slightly more clinical performance, then I would say it was the Sigma. Looking at close-up image quality, I thought they both performed very well, but the Sigma has a significantly closer minimum focus distance than the Viltrox, and I think some people really do love taking those close-up pseudo macro shots. So if that's something you're into, that is definitely a win for the Sigma, but the Viltrox is no slouch by any means, and I think it has a reasonably average minimum focus distance, but when it comes to sharpness and detail and close-up image quality in that really close minimum focus distance, the Sigma definitely has the win there. Looking at sharpness and starting in the center of frame, the Viltrox is exceptionally sharp right from f1.2. You do not have to stop this lens down at all. Now, when I shoot the two side by side on a test chart at f1.4, they are both very sharp, but the Viltrox just has a little bit more detail and a little bit more contrast. Whether you would pick this in real world results, I'm not sure, but on a test chart, you can see it does have a little bit better performance. Once we stop down to f2, it is very close, but the Viltrox still has a little bit of an edge. And at f2.8 on, it is very, very hard to pick, and I think they're both virtually identical to each other. Now, looking at corner sharpness, this is not something I really worry about on this focal length, because usually what I'm doing is I'm putting something in the center of frame, and I'm getting an out of focus area around them. So there is almost no occasion where I'm going to have something in the corner frame that I'm worried about being sharp and in detail. It's just not something that is part of composing with lenses of this focal focal length generally. But if we look at the Viltrox at f1.2, it is very sharp. It is sharp enough and certainly acceptably sharp for anything that I would use it for. Looking at the two side by side at f1.4, they are both sharp, but the Sigma does have a slight edge in detail. Once again, I'm not sure if you would pick this in real world results, but on a test chart, you will notice the Sigma does have a little bit more detail. At f2, the Sigma remains a little bit better. Once we get to f2.8, it is very close with a slight edge to the Sigma. And then from f4, f5.6 on, you really can't pick them apart. So in the sharpness test, we've had kind of a bit of a flip of what we got with the center sharpness. You're going to see that the Viltrox has better center sharpness. The Sigma has better corner sharpness. If I'm going to pick between the two at this focal length, I am going to take center sharpness over corner sharpness. But in real world results, I'm not even sure you'd be able to pick either of them apart. Now, looking at bokeh and background blur, and I think with a lens like this, where you're going to be shooting blurry background portraits or isolating subjects, whether it be in street photography, product photography, or pictures of people, the quality of the background blur might be more important than the sharpness and detail that either of the lenses render. And that's because when you take a blurry background portrait, probably 25 to 30% of the image is in focus and the entire rest of the image is out of focus. So most of the image that you're capturing is an out of focus area. And we want those backgrounds to be smooth and pleasing and just form a really nice backdrop to whatever is sharp in the center of frame that we're trying to draw the viewer's eye to. We don't want that blurry background to be busy or distracting. And I would say both of these lenses render absolutely excellent results, and I would be happy with either of them. They both have a bit of cat's eye at the edge of frame. The Viltrox has a little bit more cat's eye effect, which gives it somewhat of a swirly bokeh look. And I think in scenes with very busy backgrounds, the Sigma might render those out of focus areas just a slight bit smoother. But once again, I really had to put the images side by side and go back and forth. I'm not sure you would even pick this in any real world results. In doing this comparison, I don't think there is a clear winner. This really is going to come down to personal preference. Both of these lenses are a similar price, and each has their advantages and disadvantages. The Sigma's smaller, it has marginally better flare performance, and with busy out-of-focus backgrounds, it might be that slight bit smoother. The Viltrox goes to f1.2 rather than f1.4. This gives you a slightly better subject isolation. It will also give you a little bit better low light performance. The Viltrox is also sharper with better contrast in the center of frame, starting right from f1.2. As for my personal preference, I do think I prefer the Viltrox, but honestly, it is so close, I would be happy with either one. If you're interested in the 56mm focal length and these lenses are a bit out of your budget, I've just thrown a video on screen now. This is the comparison between the Sigma 56mm f1.4, the Viltrox 56mm f1.7, and the TT Artisan 56mm f1.8. And those other two lenses are ultra budget options that for most people are going to be more than good enough.